going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Back Your Play. Rich Quinones here. As always, follow us on social media at Rich QNQ, the YouTube channel, Rich QNQ, BYP for week 13 already in the NFL. Our good friend Lloyd Vance, NFL correspondent and contributor at Lloyd Vance, kind enough to join us. So as we now say goodbye to November, my friend, we always talk about this time of year, right? This is when you kind of separate the pretenders from the contenders, the men from the boys. And here we sit at week 13 and it's still in flux. We don't know, we know two or three of the really good teams in each conference respectively, my friend. But then, hey man, it's like a crapshoot.
Well, it's still early. And I keep saying that to a lot of fans that are emailing me and talking about, my team's going to the Super Bowl. And particularly, I'm based here in Philadelphia. They're 10-1, and a lot of people are talking about playoffs and all that. But there are a lot of games we played, as you're talking about, and still some races out there that still need to be decided. Obviously, some of the division leaders have big leads, and we'll see how they play out from there. But there's still a lot of football, and it's fun to watch.
Let's stick with the NFC East for a couple moments. Thanksgiving, Dallas taking advantage of a thin secondary by the Giants and really no weapons on the offensive side. And they kind of physically beat them up 28-20. You look at the Cowboys, Washington got a big win against Atlanta. They've got the Giants now 7-5 or 7-4. And then you have the Philadelphia Eagles, where everyone after that performance on Sunday Night Football saying, hey, Jalen Hurts has kind of catapulted, guys like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen and the like for potential MVP. Let's start with the Giants in that Washington game coming up 1:00 MetLife on Sunday. Washington is a road favorite in that one, laying 2.5.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one to watch because both these teams are very well matched, and we talk about always the quarterback comparison, and they kind of reminded me of each other. Daniel Jones, was a draft pick and all that, and Taylor Heineke's undrafted guy. But they're both they're not driving the car, but they're in the car. And, they're going to lean on their running games, and particularly the Giants. If Swift has Saquon goes, the Giants are going to go. And we saw that on Thanksgiving Day. He got held to under 40 yards rushing, and they weren't doing much behind him. Obviously, a lot of people are talking about the injuries that the Giants are dealing with at this time on their offensive line and at the receiver position and some guys on defense. But, everybody's getting injuries this time of year, and this should be a very close game, Q. Right now, I'd probably say I'm leaning towards the Giants in a surprise pick here. Washington's pretty hot. Heineke's the 5-1 as a starter, but I think they're kind of due for a letdown game here.
Go back to Saquon. He had $150, $152, I think it was, against Houston. Had about 30 plus something odd carries, 32, 33. Came back, Detroit, the 31st run defense in the NFL against the rush. Really bottled him up, right? They kept stacking the box. And then we saw what transpired against that Dallas defense on Thanksgiving. A lot of people believe maybe all of a sudden Saquon's hurt. I'm wondering if that effort, that workload against Houston is starting to catch up to him.
Well, Q, he's battled injuries the last couple of years, and everybody's saying, oh, he's that guy that he was in the past. And obviously he's going to have to get over that. They have some injuries on the offensive line. I think that's a key thing for them. And teams are stacking the box against Saquon Barkley because who else is going to beat him? You don't really have a tight end that's helping out a lot. And then receivers that I talk about, there's not many guys left. They made the trade to Kansas City. They lose Shepard, and, who's going to step forward for him? So, I do though expect Saquon in this game to get a lot of touches, as you're talking about, probably 30 type touches in terms of like 25 rushes, 5 catches, and then they'll probably lean on that defense from there, be opportunistic.
And that's the thing. They have to keep it low scoring. You got to get into the fourth quarter. Daniel Jones has played well in his career, 4-1 against Washington. He's had some big games against them. We saw a couple of years ago when he threw for over 300 yards with 5 touchdowns, and he ran for 1 in that one, 5 total TDs, I should say. So listen, you mentioned it, right? They're so thin at the wideout position. I mean, you don't even know if they're going to have Richie James. Shepard, we know, out for the season. Galladay's been a dog. Tony traded, banged up, not playing now with Kansas City. That leaves Slayton. That leaves, if they try to get Galladay into the mix, maybe they get back to tight end. They might get some components back on that offensive line. If the Giants lose this game, then I start to see the season kind of spiral. It was a nice story. 7-2, right? 6-2, 7-2, whatever the record was after 9-8 games. Now all of a sudden 7-4. This is kind of who they are. They might be able to get to that ninth win, but if they beat Washington, all of a sudden the playoff percentages go up. So it's a big game for both these teams. Ron Rivera, who I always talk about, I always think this guy's on the hot seat. He's done a hell of a job down there in DC. So that's going to be an interesting game. How about the effort the other night by the Philadelphia Eagles and Jalen Hurts? I mean, right, we always talk about the mark of a good team is when, you give up a touchdown and then subsequently you come right down the field and score. That's what the Eagles do. Jalen Hurts with his legs, with his arm, with the maturation progress, the decision-making. What's impressed you the most about this Eagle squad at 10-1?
Yeah, Q, and they've just done a great job in terms of blocking up front. Their offensive line is the key to this team. And, they ran for 363 yards on the Packers. Packers just had no answer for them. And if they're smart, they will continue to run the football early and often. Hopefully it'll be more of Miles Sanders. I think Hurts is doing a great job in terms of using his legs, 157 yards rushing the other night, and he just couldn't be stopped. So, I think eventually, as we move closer to playoffs, and as we saw in that Tampa Bay game in the playoffs last year, teams are going to try to take his running away from him, and he's going to have to beat them with his arm. A.J. Brown, obviously, Devontae Smith, they have the playmakers there to help him out. They've assembled, but these guys have kind of been underutilized the last couple of weeks. The Eagles, I always say it, they're 10-1, and their record says what they are. A lot of people are talking about their strength of schedule and who they played and the quarterbacks they've gone against. But we're going to find out in the next couple of weeks who they are. And right now they're in the driver's seat, and they're just going to try to keep this thing going. And they have some key games coming up down the stretch. Tennessee this week, they'll see if they're able to finally stop a rushing attack, because they're ranked 19th in the NFL in terms of stopping the rush. They're only allowing 19 to 20 points a game. So they have Tennessee, then they're at the Giants, which should be an interesting game. I think that's going to be flexed to Sunday Night Football. At Chicago, they're probably, that'll be a layup, should be for them. Huge game at Dallas. And Dallas, everybody's saying they are really ascending at this point. And then they have New Orleans, and then they finish with the Giants. So some games we're going to figure out who the Eagles are. But right now, the way the Vikings are playing, we'll probably talk about them in a minute. The Vikings, they don't seem to be threatening to me in terms of the number one seed to the Eagles. I know they're not that far behind them, but the Eagles beat them earlier this season. I think you have to watch for Dallas, and you have to watch for the Niners.
Yeah, they got that big win. I should say the big game against the Jets. Minnesota does. So the Eagles are laying 5.5 at home. I think Tennessee will be able to run the ball, make it a sloppy affair. I don't see them. They're very opportunistic defense, but Jalen Hurts hasn't been that willing dance partner, so to speak. I do like the Eagles at home in this spot. I don't necessarily think they're going to cover, but I do like them to win the game. Tennessee coming off a tough loss against Cincinnati too. I want to go back. So two things real quick. I think if anything, they'll flex that Buffalo Jet game, because the Eagles are going to have everything pretty much wrapped up, if you think about it.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And you want to see a game that's lively on Sunday Night Football. So, maybe the earlier game that I was talking about a couple of weeks will be flex, but the last game of the season, obviously, probably not going to show that one.
Yeah, absolutely. It could have, they could have everything wrapped up by then, and who's to say, sit the starters, and who's to say the Giants can still win that game? That's yet to be seen. Is Hurts right now the MVP of the season, or right now he's MVP up to this point?
Well, Q, I'd still have to say it's Patrick Mahomes the way he's playing, but Hurts, he's taken that step forward in his maturation, as you're talking about. He's a true leader of this team, and he's in the conversation. Obviously, you'd like to see his passing numbers get a little bit higher, and you wonder, is he going to be like a Lamar? Is he a guy where, he could win the MVP mostly on his legs, but Lamar, don't forget, when he won the MVP, he had a very good passing season that year as well. So Hurts is not turning the football over. That's key for this Eagles team. And Right now I'd have to say stay away from that number in terms of what the Eagles are getting, but I think the Eagles will win that game. Somehow they found a way to win these games all season.
Yeah.
They lead the NFL in turnovers, and watch for Tannehill, who I'm not the biggest fan of, to turn the football over in a key spot.
2,500 yards, 17 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions. He's added another 8 rushing touchdowns, another 600 yards. So, I mean, if you think about it, you're talking 23,000 yards, 25 touchdowns. Not bad, but you're right. I mean, it can change on a dime. He can go 2 or 3 games and have that poor stretch. We saw it a couple of years ago, right? We saw Allen, then Mahomes, then Allen, then we saw Jackson and Mahomes, and then we saw Rodgers. So it's always 2 or 3 game stretch here and there. You've got the Dallas Cowboys. And I'm trying to look on my notes real quick. Indianapolis, that line's ridiculous. The Cowboys at home, lane 11. I think the Cowboys are legit at 8-3. I'm not sold on Jeff Saturday and the Colts. I mean, it's the best thing to stick with Matt Ryan. I can't even kill him because we were killing the hire. And so the guy's got no experience. So I can't really turn around and then double up and kill the guy who doesn't use his timeouts, right? Because everyone's going to say, well, he never had any coaching experience. So I'm not going to go that route. But Dallas right now, I still think, if you can get something out of Zeke, you got power, you got the weapons, and then you have Dak. That secondary, we know what Parsons can do. He's probably going to run away with Defensive Player of the Year. I think that line's a little too high, to be quite honest, but I do like the Cowboys in this spot.
Yeah, and I think that line is a little high Q too. But look for the over in that one, because I think some points are going to be scored, particularly by the Cowboys. When they get a lead, man, they like piling it on the team and getting those late touchdowns that are fantasy football and scoreboard type situation. So, very good spot for Dallas. They have Indianapolis, they have Houston, both home games, and they're at Jacksonville. Then they have the key game where the Eagles come in on Christmas Eve at Tennessee and at Washington. So a lot of winnable games there for the Cowboys, and they seem to be getting healthy at the right time. They had Gallup come back last week. He had a very good game catching the football. I don't know if Odell's going to sign with them. He's going to visit on Monday. He may be coming in. They're also looking for Tyron Smith, their future Hall of Famer left tackle, to come back as well. So, Dallas seems to be in a good position. Yes, they sleptwalk through the first half of that game on Thanksgiving, but then they really just blew the doors off the Giants from there.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that score was not indicative of the game. We talked a little bit about Minnesota laying 3, 9-2 record at home, totals 44.5. I like it to go over against a 7-4 Jet squad. So look, everyone's jumping back on the Micah effing White bandwagon, and rightfully so. I mean, you have to just play out the string. As long as he keeps playing well, or they keep winning and he's not putting them in bad spots, the numbers don't have to be gaudy, 225, 18 of 25 with a touchdown here and there. The Jets will take that. This is a tricky spot, man, because their defense is legit. They're really good. Minnesota, Cousins at home with the weapons. I do like Minnesota with the 3. If it was the hook, 3.5, I'd probably lean the Jets way. But, the Jets and that Mike White and Zach Wilson, scenario, they had a bench the kid, and they just, right now, I think you stick with White until otherwise.
Yeah, Q, and this is the way it's probably going to play out, because Robert Saleh in that locker room really believe in White at this point, and it's a lot like, that old Eagles team that I covered when they won the Super Bowl. Nick Foles was their guy. They believed in him, and he lit a fire underneath that team. And a lot of the locker room was not enamored with Carson Wentz. And of course, that came out later on. And Zach Wilson has not endeared himself to the media. And I'm hearing a lot of rumblings about the locker room, and particularly the defensive side of the ball. Do those guys want him as their leader? So, Salah is trying to win games, and take your hat off to him, because that team plays really hard for him. And then Mike White throws for 3 touchdowns last week. Zach Wilson has never done that, and Zach Wilson leads the NFL in interceptions. And if you protect the football with C.J. Mosley and Sauce Gardner and the rest of those guys defensively, they can get after you. So it's going to be an interesting game against Minnesota. We'll see if Minnesota, who kind of stumbled along and into a win this past week, can do the same thing. But I think it's going to be tough sledding for Dalvin Cook and those guys. Now, the key matchup is going to be Sauce Gardner, probably the rookie of the year defensively, against Justin Jefferson on the outside. So I think Minnesota wins this one, but it's probably going to be a close, high-scoring game.
All right, and I agree with you. I can see a type of a 30-24, 30-27 type of game, which the Jets rarely give up those types of points. Miami against the 49ers. Here's another one, right? Because the 49ers are starting to put it together when they're healthy. And now you've got the issue with McCaffrey, no Mitchell. So it's going to fall more on Jimmy G. Tua in that offense has been playing lights out. San Fran's laying 4. I think this is the game where if Miami goes on the road and they beat the 49ers and Tua has that 20 of 28 for 276 and 3 touchdowns, finally people can just like back off this kid. Like I hear some of the other talking heads on the national media say, well, he can't throw the ball down the field. That's not true. He's had thrown the ball down the field. I hear people say, well, he's not really a scrambling quarterback. What are you watching? He can scramble, move around. He makes plays. He improvises. He's a gamer, and they're 8-3. I mean, if you're a Dolphins fan, you got to love what you're seeing. And maybe that changes come playoff time, cold weather, who knows? Kansas City, Baltimore, Buffalo, Cincinnati. I don't know. But I got to give him his just due. I think he's playing. He's exceeded the expectations that squad has. I just don't know that 49ers on the road. It's enticing because I've followed Miami a lot. The 49ers, I think, are banged up a little too much now on the offensive side of the ball. Without running backs back there, they're going to have to put the ball in Jimmy G's hands.
Yeah, and then Jimmy G's going to have to rely on Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, make some plays for them and just go from there. And this is an interesting game because now Miami has Jeff Wilson, who they got in a trade from the Niners. Right. So is this a revenge situation? And then, the Dolphins are not going to have their left tackle, Teron Armstead, who's banged up and he's going to play in this game. So does that help Bosa and that defensive line? So this is going to be a close game. But when you look at what Mike McDaniel has done, possible coach of the year candidate as a rookie and Chris Greer, who's done a good job as their GM, they put together a squad here and talk about Waddle and Hill on the outside. There's just a lot of people to cover, and Tua is playing within the system. Yes, some people don't, like as you're saying, think he's flashy enough, but he's getting the job done and he's getting the ball into his weapons' hands and he's not turning the football over. So this is a very key spot for them. It's prove it game, like I always say. They're going on the road, hostile environment, and I would lean towards the Niners because they're pretty hot right now, and I think they're kind of sending. But you can't count out Miami. I think this is a field goal type game, and with the way Robbie Gold's missed the field goals for the Niners, definitely it possibly could be the Dolphins. So I expect a close one here. Maybe take who's the favorite?
49ers laying 4.
Yeah, so I'd probably take the Dolphins in the points then.
Okay. All right, midway through a Wednesday edition of BYP Back Your Play. Rich Quinones here. Lloyd Vance joining me for a couple moments. 2 4-7 squads. The only reason I want to bring up Jacksonville is because I just love the gutsy calls, and I think Trevor Lawrence is starting to come into his own. If you're Baltimore, now you've got a Denver squad. You're laying 9 against a 3-8 Broncos squad. Baltimore, they should be at best a 9-2 team. They had way too many games this year where they've blown leads or, that Giant game, they were up by 10 with under 4. They've blown several leads of double digits. You would think that they would basically sit there and just go out and wax Denver because it's 7-4. You're still looking at Cincinnati in that division as well. That's all of a sudden starting to show some signs of life at 7-4 against Kansas City. But Baltimore, you talk about an inconsistent team. I mean, how much of the fault do we put on Lamar Jackson and how much of the fault do we put on the defense?
Yeah, Q, this is a prove-it game for them. And, there's enough blame to spread all around to this team. I sometimes think they're very conservative in their play calling. I know they're another team with a lot of injuries in terms of their receivers. And at the beginning of the year, you have to say, did they surround Lamar with enough talent as it was? So, with their tight end a little banged up and the receivers as well, but he's got to step forward. So this is a huge game. It's a possible trap game because Denver is limping in, and you know, Nathaniel Hackett, he's on the verge of possibly getting canned, and they're talking about is it Russell Wilson? He's fighting with Purcell, the defensive tackle, on the sideline. So
no one went to his birthday party.
Yeah, so this is and don't forget, Denver has a very good defense, though. You know, they're not scoring any points, but that defense is ranked third in the NFL. So
they stink, man. They stink,
the
bro.
Ravens got to get it done. The Ravens got to get this one done, and then they have two huge road games behind it at Pittsburgh and at Cleveland. Two divisional games they have to win. So I think the Ravens will take care of business.
Might be a $240 million mistake with a Russell Wilson. Like, I give a crap if half his teammates went to his birthday party. What's his Bo Callahan on draft night? I mean, come on. But you do have to wonder when you get defensive players and they start barking like that. I mean, he's just not the right fit in Denver. And it's almost like Rodgers at this point, right? With the money in the contract, what are you going to do? You're not going to eat it. You're not going to trade him. You know, you're going to play it out. You're going to see maybe next year, second year in this offense, maybe it's a little different with Denver, but everyone talked about, hey, you bring him in because you have a ready-made defense to kind of win now. And that certainly hasn't been the case. So Green Bay, and I just want to bring this up for a second, with Aaron Rodgers, again, tied to that contract, the money, he calls the shots, he came back, get me the players. I just don't see Jordan Love actually having any type of future with Green Bay. I just.
Well, Q, you know, that's an interesting thing because Aaron Rodgers and you talk about Russell Wilson, they're both those older quarterbacks, have won Super Bowls in the past, and they got these huge egos that are tied to these extensions. And, you know, as you're saying, they're running the show. So Rodgers, even though he's beat up and he's got the thumb injury and I think the abdominal, they say he's going to play in this game. So, you know, he doesn't want Jordan Love out there any more than anybody else would. But Love, I think maybe he'll get his opportunity in the meantime, you know, once the season ends. But it's going to take Rodgers kind of, he doesn't have a no trade, but he's got a situation where that you can't trade that contract unless he really wants to. So, you know, Jordan Love's going to have to sit and wait his turn, and maybe Aaron Rodgers will retire, but I just don't see that happening with all that money on the table. He's due like $50 million next year on the books.
Yeah, that's too much coin. That's not happening. That's not. He's coming back. But, you know, you bring up an interesting point. If they trade Love, what are they going to potentially you can't really value a kid off a couple of reps and a couple of series against the Philadelphia Eagles, albeit he looked good. Bills against New England. Buffalo's 8-3, New England 6-5. Buffalo on the road laying 3.5. 43.5 is the total. I think this one hits in the under. You know, the Bills have been one of these teams where you're like, all right, what's wrong with Buffalo? Right? You know, they're not that dominating team that we saw in the beginning of the year when they waxed the Rams and everyone said, this is the best team in the NFL. Hey, man, it doesn't always go like that. Right? I mean, it's a long season. Guys get banged up. We're already seeing it. They had that devastating loss to Minnesota, and then they've come back and they handled business against Cleveland. And to Detroit's credit, played very well. And that was a game Detroit could have stole, but Buffalo wound up winning it. Why? Because the quarterback made some ungodly, ridiculous throws, basically with a bum trunk, man, a bum arm.
Yeah, he set up fast for that game winner with that huge 36-yard pass to Diggs when it mattered most. And you're right that they've had injuries, and now Von Miller's not going to play. And you know, they've won two good games in Detroit the last couple of weeks. And, you know, you're hoping they're back on track. But now Buffalo has, you know, they're at New England. They have the Jets and Miami. So 3 divisional games that are huge. They want to get revenge on Miami, obviously, in a couple of weeks. But they got to stay the course. And I still don't like the amount of hits that Josh Allen has taken. That elbow's pretty beat up, and he's still their leading rusher. They got Naheem Hines at the trade deadline, but he's a guy that's a pass catcher. They don't have that complimentary guy that can run the football. Yes, they're going to spread it around, but you wonder how that's going to be when the weather gets bad. So this is a huge spot for them. I still think that Buffalo is going to find a way to win this game. when you look at the Patriots, I still am not that impressed with Mac Jones.
Neither am I.
He's played, and I don't know if Parcells trusts. I'm sorry, Belichick trusts him entirely.
Oh, pa.
Yeah, so I think that I think the Bills pull this one out, but we're going to see over the next 3 weeks, like I was saying, especially in that Miami game, what this Bills team's made of. Winning the first 6 games and no trophies are given out at that point. So they really got to step it up.
Allen's been sacked 23 times this year, put up some pretty good numbers, 3,200 yards, 23 touchdowns, 11 picks, but he had a couple of those bad red zone picks over the last several weeks. Pittsburgh, Atlanta playing out the string. You've got Kansas City and Cincinnati. This is a big game, man. I mean, Kansas City's 9-2. Cincinnati all of a sudden has life. We're seeing one of the participants in last year's Super Bowl basically, call it a season and go golf, and that's the Rams because of all these injuries. But then Cincinnati, I think we forgot about the Bengals, and boom, you blink, they're 7-4, and they put themselves right back in position. Playoffs were to start today, they would be the 6th seed.
Yeah, how about the Bengals? They start 0-2, and then they turn around. Now they're 7-4, and then usually 0-2 has been a death sentence the last couple of years. But
that's right.
Burrow is just such a tough competitor, and yeah, he's not going to have Joe Mixon this week, but I think he's going to get back Jamar Chase from the hip injury, and you're Tyler Boyd and the rest of those weapons. That they're doing a good job. The thing is, their defense with Hubbard and rest guys, they're going to have to get some pressure on Patrick Mahomes, make him uneasy in the pocket, and we know that the Chiefs are a passing team, so they're going to try to dink and dunk down the field and then hit some big plays here and there with Kelsey and the rest of their receivers. So it should be a really exciting game, rematch of the AFC Championship game last year. And I've been back and forth on this one. I think Mahomes is going to find a way to get revenge. It'll probably be a very close game. Harrison Butker has been kicking the ball very well the last couple of weeks, so look for him to hit a game winner.
All right, 2 more before I let you get out of here. Texans, they're getting 7 against Cleveland. Cleveland stinks, but the big story is the return of Deshaun Watson going back to his old team. I mean, what do you expect over the next couple of weeks? And I mean, I don't even, at this point, I don't even care. I don't care how he's received or how he's not received. I think he shouldn't be playing. I think he should still be suspended, but that's a story for another day. But hey, I mean, people are going to watch because they want to see, right, the eye test. They want to see how he looks. And if the Browns made the right decision. Now, you're not going to figure it out in 4 or 5 games, but still.
Yeah, and the Browns gave him a ton of money. They structured that contract where it was guaranteed money. So they're saying this is their guy. And much like when I covered the Michael Vick situation when he came back to the Eagles after his break, there were some protesters and people that were not happy about it. And I'm sure it'll be the same thing at Houston this weekend. But, I think Cleveland's going to find a way to win this game. Houston is very bad. Obviously, they're probably going to get the first overall pick in the draft and then look to a quarterback to the future. I think Cleveland's going to win this one, and then maybe based on their defense getting some timely turnovers.
Yeah, and then ultimately what happens, right? As long as someone's throwing touchdown passes, people don't care what they did. I mean, that's what happened with Vic. I mean, it's just the bottom line. He paid his time, and then obviously he's resurrected his life in that regard post-career. And then lastly, I know the Cardinals have a bye, but I mean, that coach to me needs to go. And then Kyler Murray, that's another, 100 and something, 200 something odd $1 million problem. I mean, what do you do with this kid?
Yeah, Kyler Murray, that contract starting to remind me a lot of Carson Wentz. That was the albatross around the Eagles' neck. You remember, who's going to take that? That's all everybody kept saying. Then they found their patsy in the Colts. So maybe Arizona can find some place to send Murray to. But, I tend to agree with you that Kingsbury's going to be gone and that, then they're left with Kyler Murray and that huge contract. And Murray's not getting along. The locker room, there's just a variety of things just swirling around this team. And the Bidwell family, that's the owners, I think they're going to make some changes, and we'll just have to see how it goes from there. But a very ugly situation for the Cardinals, and I don't see it getting any better in the next couple of weeks.
He threw for 3,800 yards, 20 touchdowns, 12 picks his rookie year when he was sacked 48 times. He's been sacked 25 times this year, and he's thrown 14 touchdowns, 7 picks for 2,300 yards, and he's been banged up. So he might be out of the league in a couple of years playing baseball. Who knows?
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of like Vince Young. Remember
Yeah.
Vince Young just came on like wildfire for the Titans. And, I'm not saying it's the same thing with Kyler Murray, but I'm hearing that he's just not doing his homework. And he's a guy that kind of ad-libs, and it worked early in his career. We saw that with Young and some other quarterbacks, but you got to study and you got to do the work. So it's not looking good right now in Arizona with Kyler Murray.
All right, got about 30 seconds to a minute before I let you get out of here. Week 12 game ball, week 12 lackey.
My game ball definitely to the Eagles offensive line. They were just incredible. Opening holes, 363 yards, which was almost a franchise record. Just missed it. 7.4 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. So they just demolished the Packers up front. And if the Eagles smart, they'll just keep leaning on that all the way to the next level. And then my lackey, I had to give it to Dennis Allen, the head coach of the New Orleans Saints. His team gets shut out 13-0 by the Niners. Didn't even really show up for the game. They had their time of possession was terrible. I think they only had 25 minutes of possession. They had 6 penalties and 2 bad fumbles in this game. And I think it's going to be a long season for New Orleans.
Yeah, and a long off season. They're going to need a quarterback as well. A lot of teams are going to use or need some quarterbacks heading into the offseason. He, of course, is Lloyd Vance at Lloyd Vance on Twitter. Give him a follow as well. Great stuff as always. We'll get this posted up, downloaded, and set up. But I always appreciate you joining me for a couple moments, pal. Enjoy the games week 13. We will talk next week.
All right, Q. Thanks for having me on.
All right, there you have it. So excellent stuff as always from Lloyd. We always appreciate him coming on board. And again, the picks from our good friends at spookyexpress.com. Check out all the NFL promos. We tend to agree with our picks. The Bills, we like Minnesota at home. He's going with the Giants. I'm not yet ready for that. I'll talk a little more about that on the 27 and Q pod. Eagles we like as well. I'm going with Miami on the road, and then Kansas City laying the 2 on the road against Cincinnati. So appreciate everyone keeping us locked in. Don't forget, 27 and Q is going to drop in about another hour. We'll post that with myself and Brandon Jacobs, but we appreciate everyone keeping it locked in to back your play. We'll have this up on the Rich Q on Q YouTube channel. Follow me along on Twitter, Facebook, IG at Rich Q on Q. And always remember, if you say it, you play it. If you back it, you'll stack it. Have a good Wednesday. We'll talk to you soon.